Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do some first chapter reading, but I'm going to be doing it blind, so let's go see how that goes. So first of all, no, I don't mean that I'm going to be reading books with a blindfold on. That would be a little bit silly. Instead, what I did was to read the first chapter of 9 different books, but I don't know what books they were. I still do not know. I will find out whilst I'm filming this video what those books were. So what was the concept behind this one? So as you may know, I really like self-published fantasy books, and I've been paying particular attention over the past few years to the SPFBO competition. And what I've done here is to read the opening chapter of 9 of our 10 finalists for SPFBO7. So I guess we'll start off with a couple of explanations. First of all, what is SPFBO? So this is the self-published fantasy blog off. It's something that the author Mark Lawrence has been running for 7 years now. He's just announced SPFBO 8, so there will be another competition for 2022 to 2023 as well. In this competition there are 300 books which are spread out between 10 different review blogs or sites, and the collective reviewers at those blog sites will review each and every one of those books at least partially. They will narrow it down to a group of semi-finalists normally, and then they will put forward their one finalist so that there are 10 finalists in total, and then all of the review blogs will read all 10 of those books, give them a score which is aggregated to give our final winner. So SPFBO7 is just about to end. At the time of filming, we are about 2 weeks away from finding out which book is going to win the title. By the time this video goes live, it's probably closer to 1 week away from finding out the winner, so I cannot wait to see who comes out on top. The 10 finalists that we have this year, I will refer to my handy little notebook here, but we have Norilska Groans by Michael R. Fletcher and Clayton W. Snyder, We Men of Ash and Shadows by H.L. Tinsley, Legacy of a Brightwash by Crystal Matar, Shadows of Ivory by T.L. Greylock and Bryce O'Connor, Hall of Bones by Tim Hardy, The Iron Crown by L.L. McRae, Rain and Ruin by J.D. Evans, The Forever King by Ben Galley, Burn Red Skies by Kirsten Espinosa Rosero, and The Mortal Blade by Christopher Mitchell. So I had a random idea that I would blind read these books without knowing which book I was reading. I would read the first chapter, not the actual book itself, sorry, but the first chapter of each of these books to see which one I liked the best. I know that there are some of these books that I'm not interested in reading. They don't gel with me. It's not my subgenre, I suppose, but the books themselves don't necessarily resonate with me. There are some books on here that I really do want to read. So there's a good mixture here. But what I did realise when I was doing the prep for this little kind of experiment is I hadn't actually read the synopsis for the majority of these books. I'd looked at the covers, I'd seen them quite a lot, but I haven't actually read the synopsis. I don't know what these books are about. So what I did for this was I went on Amazon, and they have a sample for each of these books, which includes kind of the first few chapters, depending, I guess, on the size of the books. I downloaded the sample from there and I viewed it in the Kindle for PC app. I then took screenshots of the opening chapter of each book and pasted them into Word so that I could read these without any indication whatsoever of which book was which. There were a couple which give it away. There are 2 which I found whilst reading these which give the title or part of the title away within the opening sort of paragraph or 2. So those I know. And there is also one that I'm familiar with the artwork with, so I know that one. I did recognise that. But as much as possible, I wanted to read these without knowing what I was reading when I came to it. To help me with that little bit of mystery, I got my wife to rename the files on my computer 1 through to 9, and then to label on little bits of paper, which I've got folded up down the side here, which title each of those numbers corresponds to. So towards the end of this video, when I talk about which my favourites were, I will then go through and find out which book corresponds to which number. Now, before I get on to my thoughts for the opening chapter for each of these books, I guess the other thing which is maybe a bit outstanding is there are 10 finalists. Why am I only doing 9 in this little experiment? And of course, for those who've been watching the channel or following my reviews on Goodreads, you may know that I've already read one of these books, which was The Iron Crown by L.L. McRae, and I really, really enjoyed that one. I said in my review for that book that, as far as I'm concerned, it's good enough to win the competition. I really hope it does, no disrespect to any of the others, and I did read some good opening chapters here, but I really did enjoy The Iron Crown, and it's my pick to take the SPFBO crown this year. As far as this little experiment goes, it would be unfair for me, even if I was to read that opening chapter for the Iron Crown as well, it would just be unfair because I have the experience. I know, first of all, that it comes from the Iron Crown, but also I know what the rest of the book is like, so even if I tried, I wouldn't be able to compare it to the other books in this little challenge without any bias because of my previous experience with the book. So that's why there's only 9 titles included here. But what I'll do is just give a very quick rundown of the thoughts that I had for each of these books. I jotted them down in my handy little book here, and I'm going to go through those, let you know a little bit about those books and what I thought, and pick out my favourites and the ones that I want to read going forwards. So book number 1, starting at the start, because that's a great place to do it. I know which book this one was because within the first or second paragraph we have the word Norilska, so I know that this one is Norilska Groans. This is one of the ones that I wasn't sure about originally because, again, I've not looked into it. I think there's only one really that I knew a bit about the story for, and one that I had read the synopsis for, but I couldn't actually remember a lot about it. But this is one that I hadn't really looked closely at. So this one has quite an interesting sounding setting. It's very gloomy, and we start out in a slaughterhouse, and we've got machinery here. So we've got coal-fired, steam-powered machines, which for me is one of the things that I don't really like. I like my fantasy to be before an industrial revolution sort of setting, so this one is probably not going to be one for me going forwards. We also have talk of warfare in here. The character that we follow here is a retired soldier, and he talks about fighting with rifles and sabres, and he talks about a service revolver as well. So again, guns in fantasy is not something that I personally like, so this book will not be for me, but it's good that I've found that out at this point. The part that I found interesting about the setting of this one is what they're actually doing in this slaughterhouse. So it's not just cows or pigs or anything along those lines. We're talking megafauna. We don't get any real information about them, but we have these giant beasts that feed this world. So that's really interesting and would have been something that I'd be looking forward to finding out more about. It was quite a brutal and bloody opening to a book, so it definitely sets the scene in that sense. And I did say to my wife after reading this one that when I closed the file after finishing the first chapter, I could kind of feel the gloominess of the setting just seeping into me. And that's not to say that it's a really horrible book or anything along those lines. It's more to say that I think that's the kind of the aim. That's what the authors were going for with this one, and they did a really good job at setting the scene and showing us that it's a really gloomy, harsh, unforgiving world that they've got here. So overall, this is one that doesn't really do it for me, and I'll put a cross next to it because it's one that I'm not going to be looking to read in the future. Okay, so on to book number 2. This is one that I do not know what it is, but I will be looking forward to finding out because I really had a good time reading this one. We open up this book with a character who I very quickly noted down has some Jedi mind trick kind of powers. I did expand on that later on as more was unveiled in this, but it's actually some kind of shapeshifter. And the character says, "You see me as that guard over there by the door." And although I thought it was a bit different initially, what this appears to be is just kind of a way of referencing that this shapeshifter type character is changing their appearance, because we do get bits talking about it being a bit of an illusion, so it's not necessarily just what they're seeing. I get the impression that this character is actually changing her appearance, and that the line in the text, it happens a few times, the kind of italics where she is thinking, "You see me as this person." I get the impression that that is just telling us that she has changed her appearance. And I like the way it's done. It's not explained at all, but you don't need the explanation to it because it becomes apparent through the way the story is written that that is what's happening. So this character is some sort of underground character. She's going in on a job, by the looks of it, to disrupt business, and she disrupts this kind of mob business by killing the mob bosses. They will be replaced, and she knows that, and her employer knows that, but it's just a case of disrupting the work that they're doing. So she goes in and she infiltrates this I don't know if it's a club or something along those lines. She infiltrates this place by using her powers of illusion or shape-shifting abilities, and she goes in and feeds these mob bosses poisoned drink. One of them is a little bit suspicious and gets her to drink some as well to prove that it is fine. So we find out from this as well that she's got healing powers, because it says that she can feel the poison working inside her and she surges her self-healing powers. So that's something else that's quite interesting about this one. She's obviously got at least two different powers, the shape-shifting and the healing, and it's a really interesting setting. I like the opening to this one, and it's definitely one that I'll be looking to find out, first of all, which book it is, but also to move forward and to read more about it. Book number 3 is the second of the titles that I know what it is purely based on the wording. Again, in the, where was it, in the second line I think it was, we have the Brightwash name, so I know that this one is Legacy of the Brightwash. This one we're talking about some regulation officers who go into a bar in the early morning. I think they've maybe been on a night shift and they're going into a bar for breakfast essentially, although one of them, our main character, is basically having a whiskey breakfast because that's the kind of guy that he is. Whilst we're in there, we meet a few of their colleagues, and then there's a bit of a disruption. They go outside and they find this body which has washed up, and that is basically all I knew from the premise. Was there's a body that washes up in the Brightwash, and this body has tattoos on it. So we go through and we have a look at this body. It's been mutilated. It sounds like it's quite a young person. It might have been specifically mentioned as being a child, but this body has no arms and no legs. They've been chopped off, and I think they've been stitched up again. Their hair has recently been shaved as well, but has started to grow back to stubble. So it's not a case of they've just been mutilated and dumped. There's some additional work that's been done and some additional time potentially that's passed since this happened to this poor, unfortunate person. We do get some additional information about the world as well, and there's a bit of intrigue there. There's talk of the Rift, which is an acronym. I didn't write it down as to what that means, but there's some sort of magic involved in that. There's talk of the Tainted, and there's talk of quickening, and this particular body they're talking about, has it washed down from the Rift? Is it something to do with them? But then they're saying it can't be because they're too young to have quickened, so it's not going to be one of these magic users. So there's a lot that's talked about in this first chapter. It sounds like, although it's not really their jurisdiction, the characters who are having breakfast in the bar initially are going to move on and investigate the appearance of this body, and that, I guess, is going to be the starting point of our story. This is another one which doesn't quite appeal to me for a number of reasons, so I've put a cross against it in my little notepad here to say that it's not one that I'm going to be moving on with. It is one that I felt that way previously about, although I didn't go into reading the first chapter with any prejudice. I gave it a fair shot like all of the others, but from reading that first chapter it didn't draw me in and want me to read more. Book number 4 was actually a really short opening, so short in fact that there was a prologue which was only about a page and a half, and then the first chapter was only a couple of pages as well. I'm one of those readers who does read the prologue. I know that there are people who, if they see a prologue, they skip it, but for me that's part of a story and it's there for a reason, so I will always read that. So the first chapter for me would have been the prologue, I guess, but it was so short that I incorporated both the prologue and the first chapter. This is, I think it might actually have been the only one of the 9 that was written in the first person, and it's one that seems to have a Norse-inspired setting. We start off with the prologue, which is a kind of telling a story of a character who is in a cage, and he's got crows pecking away at his skin and things like that. And then the first chapter is possibly this character as a young boy. I'm not quite sure. Given that it's in the first person, that would definitely make sense though. The first chapter itself, we've got the son of a clan chief. He's about 10 or 11 years old, and he's kind of bantering, fighting with his older brother who's 14. There's talk of a sister as well who's about 7 years old, I think she is, and they're basically running around, but they're told to quieten down because there's a feast going on or about to start. And then at the end of the feast we have a bard that comes out and starts singing. There's not too much more to it in terms of the storyline. In terms of the writing, it was fine for me, but it didn't really do enough to draw me in. I think, especially because it was quite short as well, it probably would have needed a couple of chapters to draw me in a little bit more. I'll put a question mark against this one because it's one that I might be interested in, but it's a bit difficult to tell from the opening prologue and chapter. I would need to read a little bit more, including the actual synopsis, to find out what the overall story is about. Book number 5 tells a story of what seems to be a well-to-do woman who moonlights as a thief. She appears to be noble, she's got a name behind her, but she's going out and she's stealing something, and we open up with her being cornered by some baron and his cronies because she's stolen something from him. She then basically hands back the artifact and uses her name to get away because the baron would normally just disappear somebody, but she's too important for that. She's got connections and he wouldn't be able to just do away with her. She then goes back to meet someone at a library who is a kind of long-suffering colleague of hers, it seems. It almost seems like a bit of an Indiana Jones and sidekick scenario. And it turns out that the thing that she had stolen from the Baron was actually a box. She was able to open it up and retrieve something from inside. And she says that the Baron obviously isn't able to open the box because if he was, he would have opened it to check that she hadn't tampered with it or stolen what was inside it. So she's got away with this, and as far as she's concerned, the Baron doesn't know that she's actually still got something of his property. I've got in my notes here that again it's one that I don't really know enough to tell me whether I want to carry on with it. The character herself is quite sassy and I quite like that, but I've got here that there's just not quite enough to tell me what to expect going forward. So it's another one that I've put a question mark against to say that I want to look into it a bit more, find out a bit more what this book is about. Book number 6 is one that I recognise because of some of the artwork that I've seen around, so I won't say what it is at this point, but I did know for myself as I was reading it. But this is an opening chapter that I've written down has it all. There is a lot going on in this one. We have mages, we have hunting parties, we have dragons, we've got demons, we've got magical armour and shielding, so there's a lot going on here. I've written down that it starts out with the hanging of a witch because I don't think magic is outlawed, but maybe it's like unlicensed magic or something along those lines, because all this woman has about her is that she's got a charmed heirloom and she's hanged for having it. Basically, she's hanged as a witch because she possesses this item. We then have people going into a bar and there's someone who says a couple of things and knows that it's going to start a fight, and he uses that to show that he is this kind of mythical figure, the Outlaw King. I don't think he actually is the Outlaw King, he's just kind of wearing armour to make him look like it, to get people to follow him. So he uses a little bit of magic. The people who are in the bar go and report him, and then you've got this hunting party of mages who go out after him. So the mages who hunt him are part of the Empire, and they are obviously able to use magics. They are officials, and they're going out basically hunting down other people who can use magic by the sounds of it. They then catch up with our main character in this kind of snowy forest. There's a battle that ensues. He basically kills all of them, and there is this sort of fire demon, I think it is, which is this massive beast that they've brought along to try and bring this guy in. Then we have a dragon comes down and helps him beat the demon. The dragon is a friend, I guess, of his. They talk, they banter a little bit, and it wears a saddle that he climbs into to fly off on. So as I say, there's quite a lot going in this one. I've written down that it's kind of got everything involved in it. It is one that I do want to read a bit more about. Again, I don't know what the actual storyline of this is, so I'll go and read the synopsis. But as far as the opening chapter goes, I've put a tick against it in my notebook because it's one that I want to read more about at some point in the future. Book number 7 I thought was a little bit of a weird one because it really doesn't tell me that much at all. There's a couple of these opening chapters that don't tell me much about what the story is going to be. They don't have what I would call an inciting incident, so to speak, and this is definitely one of them. We start off with a description of what's supposed to be this really seedy bar, but it also says it's essentially I wrote it down somewhere, still the most highly recommended venue the city had to offer. So it doesn't say a lot about this particular city. It talks about a very clear divide between inside and outside of a bar, where it's ale spilled on the floor inside and blood spilled on the floor outside. So I don't know if it is kind of this kind of underworld city or whether it's just a really dark and gritty world, because that's not really covered in this opening chapter. We've got someone who comes in and is basically turned away by the barkeep, and then our main character goes outside shortly after, potentially to follow this newcomer, and the doors are bolted behind him because it's kind of closing time essentially, and the character says as he's going out, "Time for me to start work," or something along those lines. So there's really not a lot of that kind of happens here. There's a couple of little odd bits and pieces. He spends a bit of time, I think, stroking a cat. I'm sure that was this particular one, and saying that he doesn't want the cat to be kind of tomorrow morning's meal or something along those lines. And he also says, I think there are counters that you have, so you don't take money into this establishment, so it's obviously very run down. It's the type of place you are. You have counters and you pay for your drink with one colour, for narcotics I think with another colour, or for women with a third colour, and then somebody pays you a visit the next morning and basically takes the money for what you've spent. And one of the things that it does say about this place is there are 5 girls but only 6 legs between them, as the kind of the whores, if you like, that you can pay one of the counters to spend a bit of time with. So that was a bit weird, and there's not really a vast amount more to it. I've said here that it reads okay, but there was really nothing special to draw me in. So it's one that I've put a question mark next to find out a little bit more about, but I'm not sure if it's one that I'm going to be continuing with. Book number 8 is another one that I don't know what it is, but I got a pretty good guess from reading the opening chapter. And I think the one of the lines that's in the actual chapter itself sums it up a lot better than I would do through just my general remembering and rambling. So I've written down here a quote which is, fleeing a hound-brewed firestorm and setting sail for a border checkpoint with an airship full of stolen herbs. So that tells us actually a little bit about what we're doing here. We've got dragons burning airships to the ground, we've got talk of firelands and fireborn and dragon summoners. So there's quite a lot going on here. It really sounds interesting. Doesn't really give necessarily too many clues beyond that quote I read about what the actual story is, because this airship at the start of the chapter is pulling into this port basically. So they've got this kind of firestorm behind them, and all airships are basically told to get to the nearest port and wait it out there. So they've gone there and they're smugglers, so they're talking about, do we want to do this? Do we want to move on to somewhere else and ignore that warning? And they go in basically, and instead of taking their stolen herbs somewhere else, it's a case of, right, we're going to be here for a while, so let's offload and make some money here. So it doesn't tell us too much, but I liked the writing style and I liked the kind of setting, and a couple of the bits that were mentioned there. It's definitely intriguing for me. So I've got a tick against this one as one that I'm going to look to read going forward. And then book 9, the final book of this little experiment. This one I've got down that there's quite a lot of political intrigue. We start off, it sounds like there's kind of an Eastern inspired setting. We've got a sultanate, we've got kind of an aging sultan who's maybe losing his mind a little bit, and his daughter is wanting to be a sultana in her own right, so she could take over and rule this country. And the council, their idea is basically that they will be the rulers, and the sultan and the sultana would just be figureheads. And what they're looking to do is to put forward a husband that she will marry, and he will become the sultan, and she will just be kind of behind him essentially as his wife. She's got other ideas though. She wants to rule the council, she wants to rule the country, she's happy to be married and have heirs and so forth, but she wants to be the one in charge. So it's a real shake-up of kind of the culture of this particular world. I've got in here, we've also got magic, so we have light bringers with mage orbs. There are 6 spokes of a wheel for 6 magic houses, and the sultana, or the princess sultana as she is as we start the book, she's looking to form an alliance with this other country which has kind of broken away. It was one of the 6 houses and they've broken away because they were too destructive, so they were kind of exiled by the sounds of it. She wants to bring them back into the fold, potentially with marriage, so that they can have this alliance against another threat. The various people that we're talking about here, the main ones being the Princess Sultana and the Grand Vizier, I think he was, in the council, have some sort of magical powers as well. They're not really explained, but I think the Grand Vizier has some kind of heat power. He kind of controls the room by upping the temperature by a few degrees to kind of get people's attention and say, you need to listen to me. And she's got a bit of power as well, which she uses to give strength when she's talking. If she's a bit nervous, kind of talking to the council, she uses her power to take that away and to give her strength, comfort and courage. So it's quite an interesting one. Again, I've put a tick against this one to say I want to find out a bit more about it, but I'm definitely happy to read on with this one because I like the way it sounded and what it could bring us with the rest of the book. Okay, so that was 9 first chapters. I still don't know what any of these were, except for 2 which really gave it away and 2 which I had a good idea based on my knowledge of them. But there were only 2 that I've put a cross against, which I have decided that I don't want to read going forwards. They were books 1 and book 3, and I know what they were as well. So if I just pull these papers out, so number 1, don't know why I'm showing it up because you probably can't see that, but number 1 is Norilsko Grounds, and number 3 will be Legacy of a Brightwash. So those are the 2 books that didn't really do it for me from the opening chapter, but I'm glad that I read them to find that out for myself, rather than kind of be judging a book by its cover. There are a few titles that I've put a question mark against that I will want to look into a little bit more, but maybe not read. I'll find out and make a judgment later on. So they are 4 and 5. If I just pull out the papers for those. And then over the page I've also got 7. So 7 was We Men of Ash and Shadow. So that was the very seedy bar and the 5 girls with 6 legs between them. Number 4 was our Norse-inspired setting, which I did think it would be Hall of Bones, and that's what we have. And number 5 was the well-to-do young woman. That one was Shadows of Ivory. So those ones I'm going to look into a bit more, because I do quite fancy having a look at them. We then have 4 which I've got to tick to say that I want to read more about, so that's pretty good, because there was only one of these 9 that I sort of really knew that I wanted to read before I did this little experiment. So I'm pleased that I've come out of this with some other books that I want to read as well. So I'm going to go through 3 of them first and then leave my favourite to last. I've got a rough idea of what that one is, and of course I know what 2 of these are as well through my kind of knowledge of them. So those were books, if I get to my notes, book 6 and book 8. So if we do those first, I thought book 6 was The Forever King by Bengali, and it was, and book 8, Burn Red Skies, yes, by Kirsten Espinosa Rosero. So we're then left with The Mortal Blade and Rain and Ruin. So I thought that number 9 would be Rain and Ruin. So let's have a look at that. Yep. So Rain and Ruin, I quite fancy having a look at that, which means that the book that I liked the most from these first chapters should be The Mortal Blade. So definitely interested in checking out a few of these titles. There's some more as well that I want to look at a little bit more to make that judgment on, but I'm quite pleased actually that from 9 of these books there's only 2 that didn't really do it for me and that I don't really want to look into in any more detail. Overall, I can definitely see the potential in these books, and I said at the start that my pick to win is The Iron Crown by Alan McRae. Obviously I can't say whether my opinion would change until I've read these other books, because you can't just do it based on the first chapter, but I can see potential for some challenges in here. I'll still stick with my pick because I really loved The Iron Crown. But as far as the overall picture goes, of course we've got 10 groups of reviewers. I don't know whether they're individuals or collectives, and it might differ between the 10 blog sites, but of course they're all going to have completely different opinions to me. So for instance, 2 books that I wasn't interested in here, they've made their way through to the final because other people are interested. So it'll be really interesting to see who wins on this one, and they will win because over all of the blogs with all of the different types of opinions, different reading preferences, the winner will be the one that comes out of that with the highest average rating from 10 different review sites. And of course we'll find out which book it's going to be in the next week or 2. Okay, so I'm going to go away and find out a little bit more about a handful of these books, and I'm going to go away and put The Mortal Blade on my wish list because I really liked the sound of that from the opening chapter. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this idea. Is it something that you'd like to see me do again for a different selection of books? Also let me know if you've read any of the SPFBO finalists or any of the other books which took part in this year's competition. Give me your recommendations, let me know which your favourites are. Thank you very much for spending your time with me today. As always, hit the like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already, and if you appreciate my content. You can find all of my social media and support the channel links in the description box below this video. I'll hopefully catch you in the next video, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.